Good afternoon. My name is Chris Konetsky, and I'm the group publisher for Business Publications Corporation. We're so glad that you're here with us today. Can I give a big round of applause for everybody getting out here today? We're so grateful that you're taking time out of your busy day to be here to learn and prepare your business for the year ahead. And we're excited to jump in and start unpacking what's ahead for the economy in 2024. The Business Record and DSM Magazine are here to serve you, the business community, and the entire community. No matter what the economic conditions come our way or what challenges we face, it has been and it will be our mission to inspire, elevate, and celebrate our communities. And most importantly, keep you informed and positioned so that your business can succeed. And that, of course, is why we're all here today. We've got a fantastic lineup of panelists, and they're going to help you delve into what to expect in 2024 and beyond. And so we're going to begin that discussion shortly. As we begin our program, I want to encourage you, please feel free to eat your lunch and don't need to wait until the program begins. Go ahead and start eating. This event, of course, wouldn't be possible without the support of our sponsors. So before we dig into our discussions today, please help me welcome President and CEO Susanna Debi, who's going to help introduce today's sponsors and our CFO of the Year. Please welcome Susanna.
Good morning, everyone. It's wonderful to see you. And we're glad that it got down or got up to 32 degrees instead of 32 below. Can we get a round of applause for that? So as Chris said, I am delighted to be able to introduce and thank our sponsors, without whom this program would not be possible. Our first sponsor is Raymond James. They have been our presenting sponsor for more than a decade. So that's just fantastic. And we want to welcome Jerry Bozen, who is the Vice President of Investments for Raymond James. But before we hear from Jerry, let's take a look at this short video. Or I can sing and dance for a moment as the video's coming. Here we go.
While you may not be a pediatric surgeon volunteering your topiary talents at a children's hospital, your life is just as unique. Your Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you give back, so you can live your life. That's life well planned.
Excellent. And so if you would, please help me give a warm welcome to Jerry Bozen. Jerry? Oh, you're right behind me.
Thank you, Susanna. It's my privilege to represent Raymond James in welcoming you all here. Thanks for coming. I'm glad we got a great day and a great turnout. This is personally my favorite event. I always learn a lot, and again, we're honored. We feel it is a privilege to be the presenting sponsor of this event. I'd like to add our congratulations to Erin. What a fantastic year you've had, and what a awesome accomplishment, and to be recognized for that. Just glad to be a part of that. So what a great year for you, and a great way to cap it off. I'd like to also thank our presenters. I'd like to thank Robin, Tom, Debbie, Kent, and Joshua, all for taking time out of their schedules to be with us today and share their expertise with us. And I don't envy their task. I thought it was an economic forum, but it's an economic forecast. And with everything, all the uncertainty in the world today, I don't envy the task of trying to forecast 2024, but I sure look forward to what they have to say. And just like to recognize and thank the Business Record and BPC. We're fortunate. I think we're really fortunate in Des Moines to have the Business Record and the legacy that Connie started and that Susanna and Chris are now carrying on. We're really fortunate, in my view, to have them in Des Moines. And thank you for all you do with your communication, the media, your publication, and the events that you sponsor. We appreciate it, and we're happy to be a part of it. And I think that's plenty out of me. Thank you very much. We are very honored, feel privileged to be the presenting sponsor of this fantastic event, and we intend to continue to do so as long as we are asked. Thank you again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jerry, for your kind words and for being our long-standing presenting sponsor of this economic forecast event. I'd now like to thank and introduce Ariane. Carrie Stover is the Chief Experience Officer, and we'll welcome her up here in a minute. Ariane is a new sponsor for our economic forecast this year. For those of you who don't know, but I'm sure you do, they offer scalable business support services for organizations of all sizes. In particular, they specialize in technology, consulting, and contact center solutions. So please help me welcome Carrie Stover, again, Chief Experience Officer at Ariane. Come on up.
Well, thank you all. It's an honor to be here today and support the Business Record, and want to thank the panelists for taking time out of their busy schedule to give us their forecast for the upcoming year. Ariane is new to this sponsorship, as she mentioned, but we have been in partnership with the Business Record since 2014, and we're proud of that. Two things that we see affecting the economy is the increase in cyber attacks and labor issues, both of which we have solutions to help with, and hopefully you can reach out for that. And again, want to thank you for this opportunity. Ariane's located in West Des Moines and invested in the Iowa economy, and definitely interested in what the panelists have to say today. Thank you.
Our next sponsor is Iowa State University. Go Cyclones. I'll just say that right out loud. One way that Iowa State University continues to support small businesses and entrepreneurs is through one of their outreach programs, the Small Business Development Center of Iowa. SBCD offers personalized, confidential, no-cost business counseling to small business owners and entrepreneurs in Iowa. And joining us from the Small Business Development Center is Lisa Shimkat, who is the State Director of Iowa's SBCD. So thank you, and come on up, Lisa.
Thank you very much. And I am here representing Iowa State University. And within Iowa State University, we have a department called Economic Development and Industry Relations. That department is made up of the Small Business Development Centers. We also have the Office of Innovation and Commercialization, the John Papajohn Entrepreneurial Center, Research Park, and CIRIS, the Center for Industrial Research and Service. In 2023, our department actually achieved a significant milestone by being honored with the prestigious Connections Award from the Innovation and Economic Prosperity University Awards. The global recognition underscores our commitment to excellence in economic development and innovation. I'm proud to share that Iowa State University is actively engaged in assisting Iowa's entrepreneurs and business owners. Through our collaborations, we help industries, partners utilize state programs, identify additional revenue streams, and create opportunities for growth. We're working with employers to establish teams at the research park, providing access to workforce and resources right there on campus, while those industry partners still maintain their location in rural Iowa. As we look ahead, Iowa State University remains committed to leveraging our expertise to address opportunities within the Iowa economy, from supporting workforce development to fostering innovation. We really want to be a course on that positive change and momentum that the state has. We appreciate this opportunity to sponsor today, and we really look forward to the panel's discussion and the insightful ideas that they put forth for us. So thank you, and let's continue working together for the prosperity of Iowa.
Our last supporting sponsor is Security National Bank, which takes a tailored approach to helping their clients plan, protect, and grow. So please welcome John Jacobson, who is the Vice President, Iowa Trust Administration and Wealth Management Services Director for Security National Bank. Welcome, John.
Great to be here. Want to thank Chris and Susanna and Jerry and Carrie and Lisa. Lisa, in the interest of equal time, I have to mention that I'm a Hawkeye Law alum from University of Iowa College of Law, and we love all of our Iowa Regents universities. My background real quickly. I am an emeritus member of the Iowa legislature, having served 7 years before voluntarily term limiting myself to come back into the private sector and accept the invitation from the Landon family at Security National Bank of Iowa to ramp up further our Iowa operations. We are bullish on Iowa, and this family that started out in Omaha now has 3 Iowa locations. And yes, as an old trust officer, I can tell you we make house calls. In addition to our trust work, we have our folks here on either side of Jordan Creek Parkway, ready and able to assist you with consumer and mortgage loans, personal banking needs, commercial loans, treasury management, and of course, I'm very proud of our traditional trust department. We now are approaching $2.5 billion in trust assets under management, with a team of 24 trust officers and support staff, including highly qualified attorneys and CFAs and great operations and compliance people. It's the greatest kind of law work a person can do, because you're working directly with the court systems to protect widows and widowers, orphans, those have been severely injured, people with dementia, ag families, planning for estates. You're helping people at their most vulnerable, and you're helping to protect them. That's a badge that we wear with great honor. I'm very keenly awaiting what should be a wonderful presentation this afternoon. Security National Bank of Iowa, we're here to stay, and we're bullish on Iowa. Thank you very much.
Well, John, I am glad we got a little state school nonpartisanship in there, so thank you. I appreciate that. So the business record is proud to say that for well over a decade, Deloitte has been our presenting sponsor of the CFO of the Year Award. And here to introduce our 2024 Deloitte CFO of the Year is Rick Tewald, who is the Managing Director at Deloitte. Welcome, Rick. Come on up. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna. Thanks to the Business Record. Again, my name is Rick Tewald. I'm Marketplace Leader for Deloitte here in Des Moines. And I look forward to this event every year. We've been sponsoring for many years, as Susanna indicated. It's an honor to welcome you again to today's event. Well, 2023 was a big year for the Kraus Group, and by extension, their Chief Financial Officer and Chief of Staff, Erin Kuhl. Come and Go, the longtime Iowa-based convenience store chain, along with Solar Transport, completed a multi-billion-dollar sale to Utah-based Maverick, creating the 12th largest convenience store chain in the country. And Kuhl played the key leadership role throughout the more than 12-month process. Leading the deal team through every phase of the project came on top of her normal duties with Kraus Group, where she is responsible for the organization's finance, accounting, and financial planning and analysis functions. This includes inventory and fuels accounting, capital planning and allocation, annual audits and budgeting, among other things. In addition to her career achievements, first with Athene and now with the Kraus Group, Erin is involved with several Central Iowa organizations, including serving as a board member and member of the Finance Committee for the Oak Ridge neighborhood, on the board of the Mercy Foundation, and in various roles with the United Way of Central Iowa since 2017. Tessie Johnson, office managing partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, wrote of Erin, "I have known Erin for over a decade. I've watched her consistently be a firefighter, problem solver, organizer, big thinker," and I want to make sure I get this quote straight from Tessie, "an overall badass." So, in my opinion, she personifies what it means to be a CFO. So Deloitte, in conjunction with the Business Record, is proud to recognize Erin Kuhl as the 2024 CFO of the Year.
Rick, thanks for that introduction. And it's an honor to be recognized today by a firm like Deloitte for this award. Thanks to the Business Record and to Tessie and Renee and Shannon for submitting nominations on my behalf. So I'm very thankful that I have all three of you wonderful women in my life. My family is also here today to celebrate and support. It's fun that they get to share in moments like this and have a glimpse of kind of this side of my life and what I do with all of this time that I'm not with them. I think my kids are probably especially excited to not have to go back to school after this. You know, I firmly believe that my job is about adding value in everything that I do. And, you know, as a CFO, you can be uniquely positioned to do that through economics and through financial return. And there are certainly transactions in my career that I can be proud of and examples of ways that, you know, I've personally impacted economic outcomes. But really for me personally, value comes in a very different form. You know, I value the opportunities that I've had the world hand me to show up as a leader. You know, to show up, jumping into the unknown with both feet, figuring out what to do, continuing to learn, showing up, standing alongside, you know, your people and your team through times of change and uncertainty, and, you know, showing up when you're asked to help in our community. You know, this year I was privileged to chair the Tocqueville Society campaign for United Way of Central Iowa, raising over $7 million for thousands of United Way's funded programs. And, you know, all of these ways to show up really, you know, are really what I value and treasure about my role and the opportunities that provides. There are some people in this room, probably a couple dozen, who have heard me say before that numbers and financial statements are the absolute least favorite part of my job. I really do mean that. I don't recommend saying that in a job interview for a finance position, though. So maybe, you know, instead, my favorite part are all of those opportunities to show up, to learn, to help, to advocate, to take advantage of all those opportunities that the world hands you to show up as a leader. I've made a lot of mistakes along the way, and I know I'll make more, but that's kind of part of the fun. So a contingent from our Kraus Group team is here to celebrate with me today. I absolutely love the people that I work with. Going to work every day with people you enjoy spending time with makes a huge difference. Throughout my career, I've loved building teams who show up every day, have fun, and solve problems. And, you know, this team is no different. When we show up with that mentality, we can do anything, and we've kind of proven that. So, you know, when you invest in really genuine relationships with your work family, you build, you know, an unstoppable force, and these people are that for me. So thank you, thank you, thank you. I wouldn't want to do this job with anyone else. So thank you very much.
Let's give another round of applause for Erin. All right, panelists, if you want to make your way to the stage. While they're making their way to the stage, you should also know Erin has a little board meeting today for Kraus Group. So I think she said she started her day about 4 a.m. today. She's spending it with us and then heading out to a board meeting. So thank you, Erin, for being with us today, and congratulations again. All right, we're ready to jump on into our discussion, and there's, of course, no shortage of topics to dive into. By many measures, unless you've been trying to buy a home, the economy is kind of looking maybe even a little bit normal. We're coming off a year where we had increased Fed rates, yet we're seeing easing of inflationary pressure, and the markets, the S&P, Dow, and NASDAQ all saw double-digit growth last year. Yet we have continued labor market pressures, global unrest in Ukraine and the Middle East and other regions. And of course, a little closer to home, Congress continues to play maybe monthly games here of chicken with the debt ceiling. And of course, we've got a little election on the horizon in November. And while we've avoided the recession that's been lingering in the background of many conversations and discussions, I'm sure whispers of recession and those possibilities are still in the back of some folks' minds and are going to weave their way in today's discussion. We've got a great group of panelists, and I'm sure they're going to touch on these topics and many more as they help us wade through the noise today and do their best to give you a window into the future. This is the part where I tell you that they know exactly what will happen this year, so listen up. No? Okay. So they're going to do their best. We've given them a license. This is an economic forecast. Their job is to try to do their best to help give you some information to do the best within your business to prepare for what's coming ahead, and to be able to do the things that you can do to operate in this environment. They won't be perfect. We never have been perfect with the forecast. Maybe one year we'll get that. So with us today, we've got a great group of panelists. Robin Anderson, she's the state chief economist in Iowa Department of Revenue. This is her second time on our economic forecast panel. When she was with Principal, she joined us as well. Please give her a round of applause. Next, we've got Tom Cavanagh. He's the vice president for BCC Advisers. He doesn't get a round of applause. There we go. There we go. Thank you. And next to Tom, we've got Debi Durham. She's the executive director of the Iowa Economic Development Authority and the Iowa Finance Authority. Please give her a round of applause. And Kent Kramer. He's the chief investment officer at Foster Group. And lastly, from Iowa State, Josh Rosenbloom. He's the professor and department chair for the Department of Economics up at Iowa State University. All right, we're going to kick this off the same way we've done for a number of years, but it's always a good way for us to get a little bit of a litmus test of where we're at. Robin, you're going to be up first. In 2024, do you think the Iowa economy is going to A, improve dramatically, B, improve slightly, C, remain about the same, D, regress slightly, or E, regress dramatically? And of course, why do you think so?
Sure. So I think, oops.
We'll see if we can bump it. Go ahead, give it another shot. Pull it nice and close to you.
Okay.
There you go.
Sure. So I'm somewhat optimistic. I think the Iowa economy will increase slightly, not regress, but increase slightly. I think there will be Iowa's economy grew pretty nicely last year. In 2023, we had GDP growth in the first quarter around 5%, in the third quarter around 4.1%. GDP growth in the first quarter was largely driven by farming. And then once we got to the third quarter, there was more broad-based gains. I do think, as I mentioned before, there will be a deceleration of growth, not a contraction, but a deceleration in growth, in part because of farming. Farming has been a pretty big contributor to growth over the last couple of years, with strong commodity prices, strong farm income, and strong land values. Now we're seeing farming soften up a little bit as commodity prices go down and expenses go up. So I do believe that farming will likely be a bit of a drag on growth this year. Another thing that's going on is a lot of economists are calling for a soft landing. That means not necessarily a contraction in the economy, but a slowdown in growth. If that slowdown in growth trickles down to the Iowa economy, that's going to affect our cyclicals like discretionary spending, finance, durable goods, manufacturing. And the other thing is, I really don't think, we mentioned home buyers out there, but a lot of people still have pretty low mortgages. I don't think high interest rates have been fully felt by the Iowa economy or the US economy yet.
All right. Thank you, Robin. Tom, you're up.
All right. Well, I'll start by, I want to thank all my friends and colleagues who asked me why I was up on this panel this morning when they greeted me here. I understand there's a lot of brain power up here, and so I'll stay in my lane as best I can here, which is mergers and acquisitions and just talking to business owners in general. I'm a C. I think it's going to remain the same. I think that's overall maybe a positive. Last year was a better year than maybe we expected. So going forward, if we can hit that again, that'd be I think a positive in my book. We saw, if you're looking at the capital markets and availability, there's still a lot of capital out there. Last year was a down year for M&A activity. It was down about 15-20%. But that's projected to come back about 12% this year. So that's a good sign that others are willing to invest. Last year, there was a lot of hesitancy to invest and make acquisitions into a recession. That wasn't really felt. And so they're generally going to see a more aggressive market this year. So I'm fairly confident and optimistic.
All right, Debbie.
I'm going to say slightly approving, and that's based on the things we can actually control in the state. And that's things such as competitiveness, our competitiveness at a state. So that's tax reform, deregulation, leaning in and leaning down, major consolidation of state government that occurred last year, our talent pipeline attraction project. We're seeing big mega projects in our pipeline, and mega projects are at least $1 billion in investment with very, very high paying jobs. And we made investments in infrastructure that actually will propel forth growth. And that's childcare, housing, connectivity. Also, I think it's interesting to know we've really spent a lot of time building a thriving ecosystem around small business and startups. In fact, a brand new ranking that came out which said that Midwest and the Mountain West are America's largest new business hotspots, according to Axios, which I think is an excellent indicator as far as economic sentiment. So driving the news was Colorado, followed by North Dakota, and followed by Iowa with the highest new startups. So great things to celebrate.
All right, Ken.
Fantastic. I'm glad Robin got to go first. Thank you for doing it. I also have to laugh when everybody asks for a forecast. I tell people when I meet with them, I say, hey, my crystal ball looks amazingly like a bowling ball. Very opaque. So it's hard to see exactly what's going to happen. I do think the slightly improving answer is the one that I like, though, because when we talk about GDP growth, the idea is that it is growing. So there's a sense of, well, if it stays the same, does that mean that we didn't grow? It just kind of flattened out, or did we actually just continue to grow? So there's a little bit of a vocabulary issue for me. And I think the long-term trend really across the country has been one that we can be optimistic about. I think we're still optimistic at Iowa as well, because growth is a good thing. I think we all want it. Whether it accelerates from here, maybe not, but to continue to slightly improve, I think would be a great thing. As long as we keep going in the right direction. The economy looks good, jobs look good. Iowa as an employer, as a state, our employment situation is so strong. When you look at other states, I think they're envious of how much demand there are for employees here, the skill level of the employees in Iowa. It just bodes well for the economy as a whole when we have that kind of environment.
All right, Joshua.
Great. So I'm in the slightly improving camp. I will say, of course, that if you were here last year, most economists were predicting a recession in 2023, and we got it wrong. So I do preface most of what I say by I know that economists have forecast 7 of the last 5 recessions. So we have the dismal science, so we have to put a little downer on things on occasion. But I think that we've had a really good year. 2023 much better than people thought, and in particular, inflation has come down a lot, and that's potentially a real positive because it means that the Federal Reserve is going to start lowering interest rates, and that will be good for all kinds of economic activity. I think the headroom for growth is limited, though. If you look at the unemployment rate, it's very low right now. The employment to population ratio is about as high as it's been historically for the last 20 years. So growth is going to be running into limits there in terms of the practical places to bring in more labor. And so I think if we're lucky, we will get moderate growth over the course of the next year. There's a lot of uncertainty out there, and I'm sure we'll talk about that as the hour progresses.
Well, the panelists hit on a number of topics that we're going to explore a little bit further in depth. One of the areas that both Robin and Joshua both tipped on just a little bit there was federal interest rates. And so, Robin, I'll probably start with you on this one. And so I'm going to give a little bit of information and then have you kind of respond to that. So at 5%-ish, 5.25, we're seeing the highest interest rates in about 23 years. So yet consumers are spending and jobs are still available, like we mentioned, even if the pace of both hiring and spending have showed a little bit of slowdown. So inflation, which we talk about a little bit later in the program today, is cooling, but not quite yet at the Fed's 2% target. But despite many's belief that the Fed was signaling rate increases in the year ahead, now there's been so much debate recently around that, about whether that will actually be the course that they take this year. So the Fed's going to meet later this week. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about what you think might be happening in that space and maybe what their course would look like. And then I'll ask a follow-up to your point there about having not felt the interest rates all the way yet.
Sure. I am not sure. So a lot of investors have anticipated the Federal Reserve is going to start cutting in March. I'm not sure if that's quite the case, given the health of the economy. I think we'll be focusing in on inflation. That's going to be the key for the Fed. And we did see a little bit of an incremental increase if you look at the consumer price index in December. So I do think the Fed is going to cut. I'm not sure they're going to cut as much as the market is anticipating right now.
Joshua, any thoughts on what you've seen?
Well, I'm not a Fed tea leaf watcher, but I think that Robin's right that they're going to be cautious about what they do at this point. I think in part because of some of the uncertainties that we're looking at in the economy. Inflation has come down some, but I think given the tightness in the labor market, they are worried about it picking back up. And running economic policy is a little bit like driving a car with the windshield painted black, and the only thing you can see is the rearview mirror. So the data that they have is what's already happened. They're obviously engaging in forecasting as well, but the reality is really hard to find turning points in the economy, and so they have to be worried that they're going to, accelerate too fast now, lowering interest rates, and I think that they will be cautious as a result.
Debi?
Yeah, let me just add though, because, obviously getting from 3 to 2% is a much more challenging path forward, right? And don't underestimate that they can do crazy things in election year where basically, the politics outweighs good monetary policy and the dollar is going to pay for that. The thing that concerns me, though, is that the market's already priced in rate cuts, right? Pretty aggressive rate cuts. They're bullish on that. And they have to be because all the debt we're carrying between the feds and businesses on their balance sheet and the cost of having to roll that money over is, so the question for them is going to be how quickly can hope prop up this market, right? And how quickly then is the Fed's going to move? Are they going to move quick enough for the market to respond positively, or are they going to, and how aggressive? So those are the things. But again, don't underestimate the politics of the election year. And so I think that's the wild card on all this interest easing that we're talking about, whether it's good or not. Right?
Kent, any thoughts on the interest rates?
Yeah, I appreciate where the Fed's been on this one. I think they got kind of a bad rap early on about maybe being slow. But again, to Joshua's point, everything's kind of in the rearview mirror. So you're given data as it becomes available. And what I appreciate about what they've said so far, and I hope they stick to their guns on this one, is they're just going to be data driven. So that any movements that they do in the future and this year will be based on what we're actually seeing in terms of data, as opposed to, Debi, what you were saying, we're trying to manipulate something either because of a market response or something like that. The market is it's highly sentiment driven kind of a vehicle, especially in the equity markets. And so for the Fed to try to respond to the equity markets, it's a little bit cart before the horse, because the equity markets are more of a leading indicator. They're forecasting. Investors are trying to forecast or guess and get ahead of what they think the Fed is going to do before they do it. And oftentimes the market will just overshoot. They'll kind of get ahead of their skis a little bit, and then the Fed will actually do something, and you'll see the market move back in line with, okay, this is what actually happened. And so for me, I just think, well, I would rather have them just stick to their guns, be data driven, and not let this thing get away from them, either on the inflation side or trying to slow things down too much.
Let's hope.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. That's right. Let's hope.
Yes. Tom, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would just add that the fact that we're talking about potential rate cuts is a real positive, though. I think we're overlooking that it's plateaued here. We're not talking about how high is it going to go this year. And so as business owners think about capital investments and borrowing, if it makes sense at today's rate, it'll make sense when they pull the trigger if rates do go down or they can refinance. And so I think that's going to be a positive as well this year.
One of the things that I always think is helpful is, okay, we're talking big macro Fed interest rates. So talk a little bit, now that we've been in this environment for a year or so, about what some of the effects have been. And then I'm going to get to your question about kind of what we think maybe hasn't quite happened yet. Anybody want to talk about what some of the effects have been over the past year?
In regards to markets?
With the Fed interest, with the higher interest rate environment.
Yeah, I mean, I think they've tried to slow things down, and we've seen a little bit of it. To Robin's point, though, I think a lot of those things still have to kind of slowly work through that. The economy is such a complex system. There are so many moving parts. To think that pulling one lever is going to instantly get the result that you want in every area of the economy is just overly optimistic. So again, for me, it's a kind of a patience game of watching the system respond. And I do think there's a lot of systematic responses that are still yet to be kind of rolled out. So to Tom's point about, will they lower? I think they'll try to get it, stay a little bit ahead of that to keep the economic momentum by lowering. The idea here is, though, if we can keep some rates where there's room to go either direction and also give investors kind of a positive real return on short-term debt instruments, that seems to me to be a perfect place to be, because those investors who need to hold cash or short-term investments, they can not lose to inflation. As inflation comes down, you can get a positive return. If those rates come down just a little bit, people who are doing transactions or need to borrow for whatever reason, it's more favorable for them. So whether that's Goldilocks or not, we'll see, but that'd be where I'd be shooting for in terms of a path.
Other effects that we've seen?
I would just add, kind of on a practical point, you've got interest rates are higher. Your line of credit it costs more, right? So as you're, we've seen the supply chain challenges. We're seeing inventory levels are higher than ever, which takes more working capital, higher line of credit, and so the cost of doing business is just higher. It's putting more strain on business owners, particularly smaller businesses.
Robin?
Sure, I would agree on the small business front. I feel like there's a divergence between large companies that have cash on hand or have strong credit ratings, and compared to smaller companies who have maybe more risky borrowers where lending is tighter. In addition, if you look, I'll just give an example of throw out a statistic about interest expenses for farmers. If you look at the USDA statistics for 2023, interest expenses for farmers increased 43% from 2022.
Staggering.
Robin, you alluded to some of the effects that maybe we haven't quite seen yet. So I'm curious if you're watching some areas on where we might see that start to bubble up.
Sure. So I'm looking at credit card delinquencies that have picked up somewhat. So I'd say the household balance sheet, if you look in general, it's in pretty decent shape, but we are starting to see some cracks in the surface, including things like debt to income ratios, credit card delinquencies. I think you still have a lot of businesses that borrowed at low interest rates. They haven't had to feel the impact of higher interest rates. Further still, we all have a lot of mortgages out there that we got at 2 or 4%. And so I don't think the higher interest rates have fully hit the housing market yet.
I want to move to inflation a little bit. That's something that everybody's talked a little bit about here. The Fed Governor Christopher Waller said recent inflation and labor market data had made him more confident the Fed was within striking distance of its goal to achieve 2% inflation. But he said he wanted to see more information in the coming months, confirming or rebutting that outlook. So the consumer price index rose just 3.4% over the past 12 months. That's down from a peak of 9.1% of 2022. The Fed also tends to look at the personal consumption expenditures price index, which includes food and energy. That grew by 3.2% over the last 12 months, down from a peak of 6.5. So the Fed's target is 2%. The Commerce Department's going to release some more information here soon in the next week or so. I'm curious what you are anticipating from an inflation standpoint and whether we've seen the worst of it. Are we going to keep getting that back down, or are we going to be in a spot where we're seeing high inflation again?
Do you want me to go first? So one thing that's interesting is the divergence between goods inflation, which has been low and moving down as supply chain issues have kind of worked their way through. But what I'll be watching is services inflation. There was hope if you look at shelter inflation, which is I'm getting in the weeds here, a pretty large component of CPI inflation. That has been pretty elevated. The hope was that as rents went down, if you look at statistics like Zillow or other private statistics, that would show up in the CPI, and that hasn't shown up yet. So I'll be watching services inflation to see where overall inflation goes over the next year.
Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly what Robin said on the inflationary. I think we're still beginning to just still feel it in the marketplace. I mean, as you talked about shelter being up, rent being up, I mean, auto insurance went up 3%. Obviously, still a big drag on the housing and with the inflation on housing. You know, our permit level is at 2006 levels. So we are, and then again, I mean, as you looked at, you know, we still have COVID cash in our economy. I know that's hard for everybody to believe. It seems so far in the rearview mirror, but you know, that's going to basically go away this year, but there's still a lot of COVID, whether it's propping up mortgages out there, rent subsidies, it's flowing. And so that's going to be anticipating it's going to stop. And then, yes, you know, then you look at industry, they were sitting on big inventories, which actually helped by liquidating those inventories, helped really bring that inflationary number down from 9 to 3. But then they're going to have to start ramping back up on that. And we are seeing some supply chain constraints in some areas. And so that's going to have the opposite effect. So I think the story on inflation of how it's really affecting Iowans' pocketbook is just now being impacted, right? Because it really is a lagging, what they've done as far as raising, it's lagging and it's going to be around for a while.
Well, and you mentioned housing inflation. And so I think the latest number is up 6.5% from a year ago. The median sales price for U.S. homes were up 4% still last year for the last 12 months. Median monthly mortgage payment was up 15% over that same period. Again, that's country. And that's not necessarily here in Iowa. Debbie, I know that housing and housing affordability is an area you guys are working on a lot. Maybe talk a little bit about some of the things that you're working towards and hoping to accomplish in that space.
Yeah. So basically for us on housing, it's really all about our newest data is saying that, you know, we're really closing the gap on the number of units that we need. We still have low inventory in Iowa. We have an aging housing stock. And the way we've been able, so we're showing we need about 25,000 units by the year 2030. And that's counting everything that's permitted today that's in the pipeline. The problem with this, it's much harder to close that gap now because what we're showing, the vast majority of those 25,000 has to be single family homes, right? And so single family homes for what I would say are workforce homes is a very difficult thing to deliver in the marketplace today because of inflationary cost and all the things that we've talked about. So the thing that we're really going to have to do on that is basically look at technology, right? I mean, 3D printing. I mean, the construction industry has been one of the industries that's really lagged for Industry 4.0 technology. And even though 3D printing is not where it is today, in 5 years, I think it will be a true game changer in the marketplace as far as bending that cost curve. But then we also have to look at local ordinances. So we're going to do a overlay. We're going to look at all the building codes in every city in Iowa. We will piss everybody off. That's what we're going to do. But as long as you're making everyone mad, then it's okay, right? And the reason we're going to do it, because again, what we're saying is you have the state building codes, but then you have every community that layers on and layers on. And the question is, you know, we need to pause and look back and say, how is this actually delivering quality, affordable products for Iowans, right? In most cases, it's not. And so we're going to overlay it and just expose the system that we really have to begin to take the cost out. And then we have to look at, you know, what is a single family home, right? And it's not the little home with the white picket fence and land around it. It could be 0 lot lines and townhouses and duplexes. But I do think it needs to be owner occupied, because if our goal is to create opportunities in which our citizens can thrive through raising wages, it also is wealth is through home ownership. And I don't think everyone should own a home. I think we learned that in 07, 08, but certainly we have to look at what that inventory looks like. So those are some of the things we're getting to do on bending that cost curve.
Joshua, I wonder, I know you're a little bit of a historical economist. And so for many, myself included, this interest rate environment we haven't necessarily been in before. For some, they have. I'm wondering if there's any lessons from the past that we might be able to apply to today's environment.
Well, sure. I guess where I want to start is just to sort of say we've been talking about inflation as if it's one thing, and but the conversation makes it really clear that it's not. The cost of living is different for everybody depending on what their consumption bundle is, and so and housing costs is one of the really difficult parts to build into those measures, because in large part what's baked into the numbers that we see is an imputed cost of housing. And for people who are in owner occupied houses, that's essentially the rent that they're paying themselves is how that's calculated based on some estimate of what that rental for that housing service that they themselves own is. So it comes out of one pocket, goes into another, and that's not really they don't see that as an expense in that way. And other people who are buying, in this environment and paying higher interest rates, they see that as a big bump in costs. Or if they're renting, then they have that expense. But for a large number of people, that's not really part of this. And so perceptions about inflation are driven much more by salience. If you buy a cup of coffee every day and it's gone up by 10%, you notice that. But the stuff that you pay for every couple of years, you don't notice in the same way. And so the numbers that we're seeing, the data that we're seeing, are not necessarily good reflections of what most people are experiencing in terms of price inflation. And that gets to some of what we see in some of the consumer sentiment numbers, which have been much more negative than the performance of the economy overall would suggest. And so people aren't reading the newspaper saying, oh, the CPI is X and therefore I should be happy. They're looking at what they're paying for a pack of gum or for that cup of coffee. Now, in terms of housing, I think Debbie's absolutely right that it's one of the sectors where we have done a terrible job in terms of productivity. In fact, we've seen the costs of housing going up in real terms over the last couple of decades. We're going in the wrong direction. Some of that is because so much housing is built as infill on small lots. And finding ways to develop in larger blocks and to take advantage of economies of scale and scope in production is going to be important, and rethinking a lot of the regulatory framework, which makes it expensive to build those houses. And we have a large unhoused population in this country. I mean, not so much in Iowa, but in other parts of the country, there's a large unhoused population, and we have to figure out how to house those people. And that means building more structures, whether they're owner occupied or rented, and getting the price down to a place where people can afford it.
I want to be talking a little bit about the stock market. Last year, we stood here, I was looking at my notes. The major stock indexes had all just suffered their worst year since 2008. 1 year later, we're coming off a year where the Dow was up 13%, the S&P was up 24%, and NASDAQ was up 43%. And I look back at my notes, nobody was projecting that last year. So if you were, you had a great year. Kent, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about maybe what happened last year, and then maybe a little bit towards what the future might hold.
Yeah. I love looking backwards. I can be so much more accurate.
2020 hindsight.
Yeah, I know. You can sound really smart talking that way. I think actually what happened last year is really what happens every year, in the sense of there's a forecast at the front end. It's usually going to miss by a factor of maybe 10%. I did a study on this earlier this year, and we were looking at the leading forecasts of all the people making market prognostications, kind of from the leading brokerage and research firms, and the average miss per year was like 14.5% above or below for the median estimate. So you looked at the median estimate of the experts, and I unfortunately get lumped into that, so I'm not trying to cast aspersions here, but I just like, wow, it's just too hard to really get that right. The other thing that I would say about the stock market is there tends to be a lot of people talk about the long-term stock market average. Let's say it's around, since World War II, around 11%, if you're just looking at the US market. The thing is, the stock market very rarely returns 11% in a year. It's going to return 15 or 20, or it's going to return 6, or it's going to lose 10. Doesn't return the average. So this reliance on a median estimate is probably not a great idea. So that's my preamble to this. In terms of what happened, last year, I think there was a lot of negativity coming out of 22. Yeah. Oftentimes what happens, people talk about reversion to the mean or recovery, whatever word you want to use. We saw a little bit of that. Then in the middle of the year, kind of got soft. And I think that the thing that I try to tell investors is, hey, you must be present to win. So with a stock market investment, you need a long-term kind of portfolio plan that when you get return, like we got in November and December of last year, if you're not present and you're not present right when it happens, you just miss. And the stock market, that's always been true in the stock market. It gives return in very short and very rapid growth in terms of the big movements. Long-term trends are great, but for most investors, they just need to be participating with that part of their portfolio that is designed to be a long-term part and just, be present to win. Last year was, to me, just classic. We got 2 years worth of return, almost 3 years worth of return out of the Russell 2000 Small Company Index in about 7 weeks. So if the average return for the Russell is, let's say, around 12, longer term, depending on how you look at it, we got almost 20% return in the last 7 weeks of the year out of the Small Company Stock Market Index. So you just had to be present to win. Same thing with the bond market. Most of the bond market's positive return across the whole happened in the last 2 months of the year because people finally believe that, hey, maybe the Fed is done, or at least they're going to hold it still. So I'm not going to have to deal with these rising rates. Now bondholders are holding, if they've invested in new bonds with higher rates of return. So at the end of the year, you had a little bit of decline in market rates, plus that higher coupon return. Bond investors were rewarded. It took a while, some pain along the way. But again, investing, whether it's stock market or bond market, is really a patience game. And I think it rewards patience.
Robin, any thoughts on stock market?
Sure. So I think, get my thoughts together. I think it's largely going to be dependent on the Federal Reserve. Right now, as we've talked about, the market is really excited that the Fed is probably going to cut 3 times. I'm not sure if that's the case. So it'll be largely dependent on the Fed, but it's also going to be about the economy. And right now, the economy isn't, we might see a soft landing. We might see the economy go as well as this year. So if the economy holds up, it'll probably be, I'm not a betting woman, but I would say, the market would be in pretty good shape.
We'll talk a little bit about Iowa GDP. And so I'm curious, Robin, if you have, from your standpoint as the state economist, how we've been performing and how maybe we've compared to other states.
Sure. So in the first quarter of last year, we had great performance. When you look at the third quarter, which I'll talk about those 2 quarters because those 2 quarters were really good, we were at 4.1%. The U.S. was at 4.9%. So we had a good year, but a little bit behind the U.S. as a whole. This year, I anticipate we probably grow around trend around the Midwest if the U.S. grows around trend, so slightly below the U.S. as a whole. And if we do see a soft landing, we might see a little bit of a blunt of that soft landing here in Iowa. Typically, we don't see recessions or downturns impact Iowa as much as the U.S. as a whole.
Tom, I wonder if you could talk a little bit, you talked a little bit about the health of businesses and the effects in the M&A space. I wonder if you could talk maybe a little bit about what you're seeing from the health of businesses as you guys are out exploring different opportunities for mergers and acquisitions.
Yeah, so again, largely 2023 was a pretty strong year. I think exceeded expectations. Not as much growth as maybe we've seen in the past looking at this year, but more of a focus on profitability improvement and investing in equipment and machinery that would improve that efficiency. We talked about unemployment being very low, so trying to do more with less. Trying to control some of those variables that business owners were hit with over the last 3 years, and that's labor shortages, rising costs of labor, supply chain challenges, and trying to invest their time in those improving those efficiencies and controlling some of those variables by bringing it in-house. So we're seeing a much more of a push for profitability improvement, less of a push on growth, I would say, which is a little different from what we've seen maybe previously. But overall, this is sector specific, obviously, if you look at it that way, but overall, pretty healthy economy. I did look at kind of a sample of some of our evaluation clients that we get annual forecast from, and last year was pretty good and exceeded their forecasts on average. So that was definitely a positive.
Debi, you're on the ground, of course, working with businesses all the time. What are you seeing from businesses and their overall feeling about the economy going forward and their growth strategies?
Well, I think they kind of respond the same way we did. They're slightly optimistic, right? But it's always the but for. It's the things you can't control. The geopolitical risk is really causing havoc. The drought is causing issues. I mean, what is it that with every foot less of water we have in the Mississippi, that's 5,000 fewer soybeans that we can ship. You've got constraints. I mean, with those war in Ukraine, that seems to just be going on and on and on, right? That's affecting the fertilizing market really bad. You got still supply chains around utilities. I mean, right now, industry, our port, and you can ask anybody in the field that does economic development, our portfolio is full with really large projects, right? But then we're seeing where the constraints we're seeing on the supply chain is still utilities on, transformers and wires. And then you've got some movement in the steel industry that we're paying attention to. And then again, you look at what's happening in the Baltic, the Baltic Freight Index and what's going on in the Red Sea right now. I mean, the world really is on fire. And so having to navigate that because our businesses play in a global marketplace. But even with all of that, I think still there is a feeling of optimism around our businesses and that this too we will navigate.
I know I've heard you talk about strategies for some emerging markets and some new industries that you believe Iowa could be playing a role in. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about some of the things that you're hoping to encourage for future growth. When we talk about Iowa GDP, oftentimes we are talking about farm economy and finance insurance. And so curious if you could talk a little bit about what some things you're working on in that space.
Yeah, so certainly. So first of all, as I say, every year, manufacturing is our largest growth state product, and it's going through what economists call the fourth industrial revolution. And it's all about, automation and digitalizing our plant floors, right? And I always say, we really need to connect our kids that like to game and introduce them to manufacturing today because it's a whole different world. And so we're seeing productivity increases, and this is good because, we got to somehow, with all the debt we're carrying, we got to figure out how to grow, right? And productivity is one of them. And you're seeing anywhere from all these investments in automation and Industry 4.0, anywhere from a 20 to almost a 40% increase in productivity. So that's huge. On the agriculture side, I mean, energy, because we run the energy office, hydrogen is a big play for Iowa. We are a producer of hydrogen, but the good news is we actually have demand from industries that want to invest in hydrogen. So with carbon sequestration and hydrogen, and then you get into bio-based products, we own the biofuel stream with ethanol and biodiesel, but we have to look beyond that. And for the first time, things like fibers and plastics that were all sourced on a petroleum basis, we can now do from a green fuel stream or with new plant molecules. And why is that important? Because right now, for the first time, because of all these carbon zero goals these companies have adopted and are just around the corner, in order to do that, the only way they do that is they have to dig deep into that supply chain. So now you have all this equity money. The venture capitalists are flowing into this space. So all of a sudden, something that was not economically feasible is feasible today. And so we really see those as really big opportunities. And then again, bringing back pharmaceuticals. Grandmother therefore, when you can't get amoxicillin for your children, there is something wrong with this equation when we're in the United States of America, right? And so because we've outsourced that and vaccines and all of these other things we take for granted to countries that are not our friend. And so we have to bring it back, but then we as a country have to decide we're going to basically subsidize some of this manufacturing again, because we need that. So those are some things why we're really encouraged, because we're seeing, and then of course, sustainable aviation fuel is huge, right? These airlines are calling for it. Well, there is nobody better suited than Iowa to basically seize that opportunity in precision agriculture. So that's why when you look at our $1 billion plus investment on connectivity, you know, it's not just making sure that we can run the world from our kitchen tables, right? It's making sure that we have connectivity in the middle of that farm field. And so that we are going to increase our yields, in which we did last year, even with drought the way it was, we were able to do that. So that's why I think, you know, again, you wake up every day and you think, wow, look at the world. Like I said, it's on fire. And then I think, thank God I live in Iowa. I think we're in an extremely enviable position.
Chris, can I ask you a question? Yeah. So Debbie, you touched on this a little bit, but sustainable fuel for aviation. I wonder if you could go into that a little more. I know we've spent a lot investing in ethanol in the state and with electric vehicles. And what do you see as the impact of that, and how does that kind of translate into what you just said?
And just so everybody knows, I told them they could ask each other questions, that it wasn't just me that got to ask. So Tom was trying to run the program here. So great question.
Well, you know, if you looked at our energy plan, which is now 10 years old, which we're in the process of updating, and, you know, the energy plan really is that we're in all of the above. I mean, we certainly support electric vehicles, but we also support maintaining that green fuel stream, because again, with aviation, you're not going to do that with batteries, right? And so we are seeing for the first time, but you're also seeing, and it's not going to be surprising to you, that who's playing in this field? Well, it's the big petroleum companies, because they know they have to, right, to do this. It only makes sense. They're diversifying their programs. Why you saw Chevron with REG. And so you're seeing a lot, again, just like I talked about on those bio-based chemicals, you're seeing a lot of money chase this to where I think it's now actually within our grasp. I mean, you know, we've talked about it for decades. It will also give new life to our ethanol and biodiesel. So will hydrogen, though, too. You know, and I'm not going to get into pipelines, right? But well, I am, I guess, in this sense. So let me just wade into this, since I opened this door, and I'm not choosing sides, and I am not a person that believes in eminent domain. But I will tell you, in order to seize the opportunities with carbon sequestration, you either have to store it. And even though University of Iowa thinks that there may be a couple of places in Iowa we can store, we have to be able to move it if you can't use it in the process. And so we're going to have to figure this pipe thing out, because it really will also help those ethanol and biodiesels. I think the whole disappointing thing to me watching this debate from the sidelines was that the people that were missing, and Chaz, you may agree or disagree with me, but the people that were missing out of that were the farmers. As far as the ethanol and biodiesel, they're all invested in these plants, right? I mean, so connecting the dots between the two, that's the voice that should have been the public face to this. And so we'll see what happens. It's at the IUB right now, which they can't talk about. So I don't know what's happening. Yeah. Even though I try to talk to him about it all the time, we can't talk.
Joshua, I wonder if you could talk a little bit. You made a comment in your opening comments that, you know, there's some limiting factors that might be suppressing growth here. And so I'm curious if you could talk a little bit about that, and then that might put us on another little bit of a pathway for us today.
Well, sure. I mean, so the first thing is just labor. That we haven't gotten to a place where artificial intelligence has replaced people yet, and I don't think we're going to get there as fast as the doomsayers think we might. I don't see the robot apocalypse happening sometime soon, and absent that, we need an appropriately trained workforce. And I think that's been a real challenge where, you know, I think more and more of the jobs that we're going to need to fill are going to be jobs that require at least a community college education or maybe a 4-year degree. And we're seeing a big drop off in the number of high school graduates in the state who intend to go to college and show up at college. And so that's a long-term problem for the state. And so we should be worrying about that as a limiting factor. I think right now it's just sort of getting that sorted out. And immigration is another piece of this that has to get solved, because a lot of the labor that farmers need and that the packing industry uses is coming from that immigrant population. And right now we just have this sort of stalemate about how we're going to deal with it. Congress has been incapable of coming up with a meaningful solution that addresses the problem rather than playing politics with it. And so we're stuck with those kinds of limitations. I think that's a big piece of this. And I guess the other thing that I would say is that, coming back to some of the things that Debbie's touched on about regulatory environment, as we make the transition to green energy, there's a whole slew of transmission technologies that have to get built in. The network that delivers and transports electricity has to change. We're seeing a lot of NIMBYism about solar, which is going to be the next big area of green energy development. And I get it. I understand why people feel like they got burned by some of the wind power developments, but we have to find a way as a society to make those collective choices and move forward with this. And the solar piece is getting more and more efficient. And to some extent, does it make more sense to put a solar panel out there or to grow corn and then turn it into ethanol? That tipping point is going to change. And of course, we are doing work at Iowa State on what you can grow underneath those solar panels. So we're doing some really interesting things there. So we don't have to necessarily give up the agriculture, but maybe change it a little bit.
I'm going to go into unemployment just a little bit since we opened that door. Iowa's seasonally adjusted unemployment rate was 3.2% in December. That was down from the previous month of 3.3, but that was up from 3% a year prior. I know this issue will rankle Debbie here. The state's labor force participation rate dropped to 67.7% from 68% in November. So I'm curious, we've talked a lot about labor participation. And Robin, I'm not sure if you've done any work in this space to understand what's leading to that participation rate?
Sure. So I think the most recent data, what we saw, just a little bit of context, our participation rate is always higher than the US as a whole. But the problem was in COVID, our participation rate went down a lot further than the US as a whole and a lot of other states. Some of it's related to retirements. Some of it was probably related to women or other folks leaving the labor force for childcare. Some of it was related to men in their 20s to 30s. So it was a broad range of things limiting our labor force. Most recently, we had some great news in our labor force improving that you touched on, but last month it went down, and it was partially who I've talked to, folks that I've talked to, is related to retirees.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
That's what we're seeing too.
Debbie, I know you guys are working on some different programs and things in that space. Curious if you've got any thoughts on what we can be doing to help encourage that space.
Well, again, and I said this last year, I'm broken record. Those of you who can birth more babies should, because we still have a major population issue. And you look at the baby boomers exiting our workforce, that is a long-term strategy, right? Got it. Long-term, I get it. But so what we have to do is attract people. And again, it gets back to Iowa looks different today. And I said that, by the year 2030, we'll have our first county in Iowa that the minority will be the majority population. I am in communities of all sizes 2 to 3 days a week. And I will guarantee you, I do not see diversity around decision-making tables in those communities. So that's got to change. And then the second thing, we have to promote Iowa, right? And so we've been doing major campaigns. We've done based on research. We know that people are moving. We know it's the younger demographics. We know what they will move for. We think we have a value proposition to connect. And so we have to market. So we've been spending a lot of money on marketing and research. Last year, #1 state for net migration into Iowa, which was positive, was California, but we know exactly the counties in California. So we are now doing strategic social media targeting to those counties. And we know that because we get the driver's license surrendering number, right? I know it seems a bit stockish. I can't tell you the names of the people and where they are, but I can tell you they're in Iowa. We also know that it was Illinois, number 2. Anyone that can leave Illinois should. Because of crazy policies matter, folks. I'm just saying. I guarantee you the who will be on the list going forward will be Minnesota, because all you have to do is see what their legislature did. Not friendly to people who brought them to prosperity, right? The business community over there. So, and then we're seeing places like the anomaly was Hawaii. I don't have a clue. I don't know if it's one large family that moved, or if we're not spending a lot of marketing dollars in Hawaii right now until it proves that maybe it's a trend. But the good news is that if you look at the Omaha Council Bluffs MSA, for the first time, we're seeing net positive in from Nebraska into Iowa. And I will tell you why. People say, well, why is that? And I said, if you've not been to Council Bluffs, go. And the reason why is because I will say, and I've been doing economic development since my first gig out of college. And it's always about, well, economic development's here, community development's here. Wrong, right? It is this. I do not know where economic development certified sites and infrastructure begins and ends in community development. Because right now, if you're not building communities in which people want to live, you are going to be left behind. It is all about placemaking and quality of life and trails and recreation and arts and culture. And so that's what Council Bluffs has done. Plus, because of our tax climate and, affordable housing and stuff. I mean, even though it's not as affordable as it should be, we're making a dent. So it is all about marketing our states and positioning, and the data is showing it's moving the needle. And so now we're going to go the step further. We basically hired, if you will, a search firm for the state of Iowa, and we're doing research on our verticals saying, what jobs do we need in manufacturing, insurance, and finance, and bio that's missing. We're going to work with the alum. We're going to put pressure on the alums. Anybody here in the university, professor? I'm going to tell you, we're going to put pressure on the alum groups, because you're sitting on a talent pool that we need in our state. And so we're going to tell you exactly who we need, what years of experience, and we expect you to work with us to outreach to them. And I know Jay Byers is all bought in with the private colleges, right? Jay, you're in. Okay, good. Got it. So that's what we're doing.
Robin, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about unemployment, what we might expect, but specifically wage growth. Do you have any data around Iowa wage growth by chance?
Sure.
And I might be pushing because I didn't put this in our pre-notes.
So I do think there's some good news about real wages and real income as inflation goes down. I think that's going to be good news for the state of Iowa and the U.S. as a whole. Typically, our wages are a little bit lower in part because of our cost of living. But I feel like this year, if inflation goes down, what's going to matter is real wages going up.
Yeah, it's true. That'd be great.
Joshua, do you have any context on wages here in Iowa?
I'm going to defer to Robin on this one. I don't have that data in front of me. So,
all right, we talked a little bit about AI today, and so I want to just kind of come back to that. It's kind of a big topic. We did a whole power breakfast on it, but curious from an economic perspective. This is going to be a broad question, so we'll let you take it where you'd like to go here. What effects we might see here in the economy as a result of a lot of the rapid growth in AI use and adoption right now? Anybody want to take a first shot here?
I can I'll give it a shot. Not being an AI expert, my wheelhouse is GDP, labor force participation, not AI. But when I've talked to folks, I see a broadening out. So you saw a first technological change going towards blue collar or manufacturing workers. I expect with the development in AI that we see right now, including things like ChatGPT, this is going to flow into white collar workers. And particularly when you think about the Des Moines Metro, the type of back office insurance and investment firms that we have, the jobs that we have here, there could be changes good for those jobs, particularly when you think about we don't have enough people working in the state. This is going to augment us. But I think there's going to be a shift between what's going on in technological change, blue collar moving into white collar jobs.
I agree.
Tom?
Yeah, that would just piggyback on that. I think it's a trust issue right now when it comes to white collar, and as that trust increases, you'll see it introduced more and more. It's probably not a rapid next year, 2 years out type of situation, but more 5+ years is what we're kind of seeing there.
Debbie, curious what you've seen maybe around the state.
Well, I think the biggest place we see it right now is in manufacturing, and they've been doing it for a long time, but it is a component of manufacturing 4.0. I do agree with Robin. I think the area that we have to watch on is that white collar, particularly because insurance and finance being such a big part of our economy. I think that is the next step. The other thing we have to have a conversation about is with AI, you are going to see major development of data centers, right? And the question is that a good thing for us or is it not? And I think those are questions that we as policymakers have to be able to discuss going forward. So that's an area you're going to see a real need because you have to store all that. And it's going to put tremendous pressure for data center development. So those of you in the business, that's great. I think from just society and a state economy, is that a good thing or is that not a good thing?
And from a investing perspective, are there folks using it to do their investing at this point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Short answer is yes. The jury's still out on how successful that is. I heard Kevin Kelly, Wired Magazine, talking a little bit about those LLMs, the large language models and the AI models, where the issue is what you get back is a very predictable product. So they're scooping language and they're scooping information, those AIs from all sorts of data sources, aggregating it, bringing back and basically giving you what he would say is like conventional wisdom. So the question there is, if you're thinking about kind of an investment that's going to give you an edge, are you going to get an edge from conventional wisdom? And it seems like the algorithm, how someone actually is programming or thinking about what they're telling their AI to do, is the thing that will or will not create an edge. So it still kind of rolls back to there's some judgment on the person actually, or people who are developing the algorithm, to look at what am I looking at that maybe everybody else isn't looking at in the same way. Otherwise, you just better off taking a very low cost approach to investing in the market, because the AI is basically scooping the market and giving it right back to you.
Robin, did you have something you want to add?
I did have something to add. So when you think about AI and whether or not that is making workers more productive or causing workers to work more, I had a really interesting anecdote from a manufacturer that I talked to. They had AI write their instruction manuals, but it turned out they needed another person to review those instruction manuals. So the AI actually took more time, at least to get started, by having to have that second worker look and check the work of the AI that was building that instruction manual.
Yeah. There's some good anecdotes. I have a very good friend. She's a PhD economist, and an AI had written an article talking about certain level of research, and it quoted an article that she had written. She had not written that article. It had just filled in the blank because her area of expertise was that area. And so it just created an article out of whole cloth, attached her name to it, and put it in the paper.
Whoa.
Yeah. I think they call it hallucination.
Yeah.
That's happening. Just for the record, we're not using AI to write our business records. So what I will say is we've played with the tools to understand how it works.
Yeah.
We've played with video tools to help with some mundane tasks for editing type things to help get things narrowed down. But there's editors for a reason.
Yeah,
So
it can get you started with many things much faster. It can just generate enormous amounts of content, almost like a research assistant who can gather a lot of, but then the person is still kind of searching through like, whether this is useful.
an overeager intern was the way I heard it described. So it's okay, we've got about 15 minutes or so left, and so I'm going to take us down a rabbit hole of doom and gloom for a little bit, and then we'll bring it back and be nice and optimistic. So, curious, what's maybe one threat we should be watching in the coming year? And why don't we'll start all the way down at the end this time, since we'll go one by one.
I think that in the short run, political gridlock is the biggest threat. We keep just sort of playing chicken about the debt ceiling and the budget. And I don't really believe that they know that they are as good at avoiding that as they should be. And they're putting off a lot of important decisions that need to be made.
Ken?
Yeah, I like Dan Kahneman, kind of a Nobel winning psychologist. He said the thing to learn about surprises is that the world is a surprising place. And for me, when I think about what creates the shocks to the system, the worries, it's the idea that there's something out there that I'm not, and the vast majority of people are not seeing, and that will create the shock. So the things that we can take into account for the risks that we know, if you will, it's kind of like another guy says, hey, risk is what remains after you've thought of everything else. And I really think rather than trying to predict or look for, hey, where's the weakness? Although we always want to do that. I mean, that's a wise thing to do. More to me is about, and I think about business owners as well as investors, is really kind of planning in resilience into whatever strategy you have, so that when the shock, when the thing comes out of left field, when COVID happens, when there's a mortgage crisis because of something like the great financial crisis, your resilience is already built in, regardless of what that shocking event is to the system. So it's not exactly an answer to your question, but I think that resilience thing is important.
There's a podcast where every time they say his name, Freakonomics, apparently that's a drinking game if you say Danny Kahneman. So if you guys want to get a little start on your lunch, by all means, go ahead and start that. So, Debbie?
Mine is always on. I'm interested in culture shifts, right? And so one of my favorite economists next to Robin, of course, who is my favorite, is Stephanie Pomeroy. And she describes what's happening, or she thinks it's Kevin. She calls it the cultural of moral hazard. And it really has to do with debt financing and this younger generation not paying their bills. So you think that we brought back student loan for the first time, that we're going to have to pay our student loan debt. You know, that was a constitutional issue. And in October, 40% today are not paying, right? You look at your auto dealer, your automobile delinquencies, it is record high. Again, younger generation. I think listen, and we handed out relief program. This whole COVID stuff went on way too long and the money's still circulating, and it should have stopped a long time ago, because we have created this thing that somebody else is going to take care of this. We don't have to pay our credit card debts. We don't have to pay our car loans. We don't have to pay our student debt, because someone's going to do it for us. So I think those culture shifts, and it gets back again to debt. And I think it's something that is concerning.
Tom?
Yeah, I didn't do very well staying in my lane, but I'm going to get back into it. As you look at the amount of baby boomers that are out there that own businesses in small communities, especially in Iowa, and the impact and the significance of that ownership staying in those communities, or at least that company staying in those, putting together a plan. And we see so often that succession plan is not in place, that management development is not in place, largely because they can't retain that talent in the community. So figuring out a strategy for transitioning that ownership and keeping it in the community in some way is going to be very important for the state overall.
Robin?
Sure. So I think I really like what Ken said. I think he made some really good points. So I'm going to kind of do my best guess. There's a couple of risks out there specific to Iowa. I think there's an interaction between what's happening with things like the derecho and the insurance industry. When we had that article about Grinnell Mutual that came out in the Des Moines Register, and the challenges it is for small mutuals to get reinsurance, I think that's a pretty significant risk. And the other thing I've heard mumblings about, and I'm not an ag expert, so forgive me here, is if swine flu hits the state of Iowa, or a large hog producer. So the chance seems very unlikely, but that's a risk to also consider, is swine flu and the chance that would hit our state, particularly with the weakness in the ag market right now. Sorry, I got really doom and gloom there for a second. My apologies.
I promise we'd rescue it and bring it back up. But can you help, I'll just say me, but our audience too, understand if something like that were to happen with swine flu? Can you help us understand what the ramifications would be on businesses that might not necessarily be connected directly into that?
Sure. Well, I think it would be hitting prices first, and how does that affect the consumer? And then it's also going to affect, demand for feed. So if you have to, I don't want to say the word liquidate the hogs, then how is that going to interact with the companies that provide feed for the hog industry? So I think it's going to touch, farm inputs into the feed industry, along with consumers into the hog industry, excuse me.
Gotcha.
So Chris, I can tell you when John Burrell many years ago pulled out of Sioux City, obviously they were in the packing industry. And what we looked at, ran some economic analysis with that, and they had a multiplier in the local marketplace. I'm not talking just, beyond that, in that local regional marketplace of about 5 to 1. So with every job they were creating, there were 5 jobs to follow. And it was everything from, all the service industries, box manufacturers. I mean, they're huge multiplier for our state.
I think that's a really good point. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to give you each a chance to give a final bullish thought, something that you're excited about or that you think you're optimistic about for the year. We'll do that as our final closing thought as we wrap up. I do have a couple things I want to make sure to let everybody know about here before the end of our program today, and some things that we have that are coming up. If you enjoyed today's event, we've got a number of other events that are on the horizon as well. On February, make sure I get you the right date here, February 15th. You know what someone said, if you don't have your spot in your notes, you just scroll to your spot, we'll find it. There we go. Thank you. I want to give you the right date. February 15th, we're going to be for our first Power Breakfast of the year. The program is going to be at the Heritage Center in the East Village. We're going to be discussing banking and the lending climate. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things we talked about today, but more specifically, what's going on in the banking industry across Iowa and what those ramifications are for lending and your ability to be getting business loans. So you can register for that. Registration is open now at businessrecord.com/events. 40 under 40 is right around the corner as well. That is in late March. We're going to celebrate our 2024 class here soon. Jason Swanson is working right now with our past honorees to get that class selected. We're going to be making an announcement in mid-February on those, so you can stay tuned. We'll do that as a live announcement on our Facebook page. I know you'll be excited to see this year's class. Of course, if you're interested in becoming a member of the Business Record and supporting us and what we do, you can do so at businessrecord.com/membership. We'd, of course, encourage you to subscribe. I know you subscribe to our free products, our e-newsletters as well. Being a member helps us and helps us put on programs like this. So thank you in advance for everybody for being here today as well. All right, we'll do our final question. So something that you're bullish on, Joshua, we're going to start all the way down at the end with you as well, something that you're feeling optimistic about.
Well, I think I'm going to start by just saying the state of the economy right now is really good. I think we're in much better shape than any of us thought we were going to be at the beginning of 2023. And that puts us in a place for a potentially really good year. It's not going to be the same kind of growth, but I think, that's okay because we're starting from a good base. So I'm bullish about that. I'm bullish about the long run prospects. I think that AI and green technologies are going to create a lot of opportunities for people who are prepared to figure out how to use them effectively. And so I think, at the end of the day, the story of the last 200 years is 24. That's sort of how much the GDP per capita has increased. We did that. We went from 85% of the workforce being in agriculture in 1800 to about 2% nationally today. Over the long run, the economy is incredibly flexible. In the short run, it's not. We see that in the short run, but in the long run, it's very flexible. And what drives that is new technologies. And we've got a bunch of those on the horizon.
Ken.
Yeah, so I think everybody knows there's an election this year. We've already had part of it here. So the thing that I'm fairly confident in is that markets will show a lot of volatility throughout the year. That every presidential year, there is a lot of volatility in equity markets, and particularly we're going to see it this year. With that being said, the long term for markets, just like the economy, is positive returns to investors. I think the idea here is, for me, when I think about what people can embrace, two things. One is I think you can be a very educated optimist in this environment. There are lots of opportunities. There are lots of things going well. Unfortunately, media and social media would rather emphasize the things that are fear-producing to get your attention. I'm not saying the Business Record does that. I'll just disclaim that. But it's a way to get attention and unfortunately distracts us from the things that are going well and that really give us an opportunity for optimism. So when I think about this year and I go, look, have a plan, embrace the uncertainty, know that there's going to be shocks, surprises are going to happen, but at the same time, build in resilience because there are going to be opportunities along the way. And if you have long-term assets that you're committed to, that you can hold and do well with, great. If you have a resilient short-term set of resources that both allow you to endure some difficult times, but also position you to take opportunity when it shows up, I think 2024 is going to be a great year. We have lots of opportunity. So I look forward to that. My going away comment is, I always use this one, is I think the way to think about it is short-term agnosticism, meaning I really don't know, and long-term optimism, meaning the trend seems to be positive and it has been for a long time.
Nicely said. Debbie?
Well, I'm going to end where I began, with the condition of our state is strong. And due to our strategic investments, competitive initiatives, talent recruitment, and then you overlay that with the innovation and technology that is occurring across our verticals, they're going to continue to propel wealth. So I think it's going to be a great year.
Tom?
Yeah, one of our great philosophizers, Mike Tyson, said, everybody's got a plan until I get punched in the mouth. And I think Iowa businesses have certainly been punched and taken a lot of body shots over the last couple of years, but they've largely survived. They've made it through that, and they've made it through that stronger. And I think, again, this year is a year about improving, just looking internal. And I think those companies that come out of this at the end of the year, they're going to have stronger supply chains. Management teams have really been baptized by fire. They're stronger coming out of this. Next year, they're gonna go on the offensive and start throwing haymakers.
All right, Robin, close us out.
Sure. So the economy, I think, as Joshua mentioned, is in really good shape. Surprise to the upside last year, which means I think we've got some resilience built in if there's some shocks this year. I think the consumer's finally catching on. If you look at the most recent consumer confidence numbers, they were really strong. So I think if the consumer holds up and the labor market holds up this year, we're going to have a good year a decent year for the economy. Maybe not like 2024, but still a strong 2023, excuse me, still a decent year for the economy.
Thank you, Robin. And thank you to everybody for being here today with us. We know that you've got a lot of places that you can be, and to spend time with us, learning, helping prepare your business and making sure that your business is strong and growing. That's what's going to help make the community strong and growing. So thank you for being here today. Thank you to our sponsors for helping be with us today as well and helping support this. We can't put on programs like this without sponsorships. If you're interested in sponsoring other events and things that we do, please feel free to reach out my way so we can continue to provide you programming like this. Also, a big thank you to our staff, Sarah Brown and Stacy Thompson, for helping put together today's events and the logistics. Can we get a big round of applause for them? Again, my name is Chris Konetsky. I'm the group publisher here for Business Record and for business publications. Our goal is to help you do business better. So one of the things, I always do that threat thing. One of my favorite parts of getting to do this type of event is we get to walk up to the line and look at all the scary things, but help put that through a lens for you all that hopefully can turn it back to that lens of optimism about what can we do? What agency do we have as businesses to navigate through those things? So a big thank you to our panelists for allowing us to be able to do that today and to help walk us to that line and also understand what type of things we can be working to prepare for in the coming year ahead. Can we give the panelists a big round of applause? I'm going to leave you with one more forecast because I know it'll get a round of applause. February 3rd, 52 degrees. Have a good afternoon.